think I relate to any of my characters. I've played a crack addict from Boston. I've played an Upper East Side princess.
The tension in the courtroom that morning was almost a living thing, thick enough to make every shift in posture or change in tone feel amplified. And although the hearing had been scheduled as a standard procedural matter, something so routine most reporters could have half-typed their notes while scrolling through their phones, this was no ordinary gathering, because in one corner sat Perez Hilton, a man who had built his entire career on thriving in the spaces where controversy and public spectacle met, and across from him sat the legal team of actress Blake Lively, whose polished Hollywood image had been jolted in recent months by an ugly, highly publicized legal battle involving accusations, subpoenas, and the kind of behind-the-scenes maneuvering that rarely sees the light of day. Perez, whose notoriety came from more than just gossip blogging but from years of cultivating an irreverent, fearless, sometimes inflammatory brand of journalism, had been dragged into Lively's legal war through a sweeping set of subpoenas aimed at over 100 content creators, a move many critics, and Perez himself, viewed as nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to muzzle dissent and silence independent commentary under the guise of legal discovery. More than 500 separate pieces of video content on Lively had come from Perez's channels over the years, some critical, some oddly supportive depending on the shifting tide of available information, but all unmistakably carrying his signature mix of sensational framing and unapologetic personality. That morning, Perez's demeanor was deceptively relaxed, leaning slightly back in his chair, fingers loosely intertwined in front of him, a faint rhythm tapping out from the toe of his right shoe against the polished floorboards, a rhythm not of boredom, but of a coiled readiness to strike if provoked. Behind him, a scattering of spectators, some everyday members of the public curious to see a celebrity skirmish unfold, some sharp-eyed gossip columnists with notepads ready, leaned forward, sensing even before the session began that something was brewing. The judge, a measured and deliberate presence, sat poised at the bench, scanning through the morning's docket with the efficient air of someone who had no intention of letting theatrics derail procedure. But then again in this case, theatrics were almost guaranteed. On Blake's side, her lead attorney stood to open the argument, delivering the kind of calm, authoritative presentation that years of legal training and PR-conscious client management can produce. Measured tones, carefully chosen words, and a tight grip on narrative control. But across the aisle, Perez's expression began to shift in subtle, telltale ways. A faint smirk here, a slow shake of the head there, glances cast toward the gallery as though silently inviting them into a private joke. This wasn't the first time their paths had crossed in adversarial fashion. Months earlier, in the fast-moving echo chamber of online celebrity culture, Perez had initially believed Blake's public statements when she first launched legal action, even defending her in ways that drew backlash from other commentators, only to pivot sharply as court filings emerged, revealing contradictions and raising questions about the motives behind her campaign. Lively's team never forgave the shift, viewing it as a betrayal, and Perez in turn began to scrutinize her legal and media tactics more aggressively, producing content that she claimed formed part of an orchestrated smear effort allegedly linked to her rival, actor-director Justin Baldoni, a claim Perez rejected outright as offensively false, pointing out that he had never been paid, contracted, or given any incentives by Baldoni or anyone associated with him. The legal filings had grown increasingly pointed. Blake's attorneys accused him of generating social media narratives for Team Baldoni, in a way that blurred the line between journalism and active participation in litigation, while Perez maintained that his Team Baldoni references simply meant any credible source connected to Baldoni's world, whether a babysitter, a family member, or even someone on his production staff, and that his reporting was independent, based solely on information he deemed credible. That morning in court, the smoldering resentment built quietly until, without warning, Perez leaned forward mid-argument, his voice cutting across the lawyer's presentation with surgical precision. It must be exhausting building a case on fiction. How much of that did you rehearse in the mirror this morning? The remark, delivered in a tone that was neither shouted nor casual, detonated in the quiet courtroom like a small grenade, because it didn't just insult the attorney personally, it struck at the heart of their credibility before the one person whose opinion mattered most. The judge, for a moment, the room froze. The judge's pen paused over their notes, the attorney halted mid-sentence, drawing a deep, steadying breath while their jaw tightened and eyes narrowed. and in the gallery, a ripple of whispers and soft gasps ran like a signal that something unprecedented had just happened. Courtroom rules are explicit about barring personal attacks and interruptions, with the threat of contempt always hovering, but Perez had skirted that line in a way that was undeniably calculated, weaponizing doubt as a rhetorical tool, planting the seed that the opposing side's entire framework was rehearsed theater rather than truth. It was an interruption with consequences. Blake's co-counsel immediately leaned in, whispering urgent adjustments to their strategy, shuffling notes, and recalibrating the order of points to be presented in a damage control pivot. Yet Perez didn't stop there. Instead of letting the tension ebb, he pulled the focus even further in an unexpected bizarre turn that left observers unsure whether to laugh, cringe, or gape. Leaning back in his chair, looking toward the bench, his tone softened, and he said with a faint smile, "Your Honor, I have to say, you're looking especially sharp today." It was the kind of remark no one expects to hear in open court, especially not directed at a judge in the middle of contentious proceedings, and the fact that the court stenographer's fingers kept moving meant it was now immortalized in the official transcript. For a heartbeat, the room didn't seem to breathe. Flirting, if that's what it was, with a judge is so outside the norms of courtroom decorum that it's almost unheard of. Judges are the unshakable center of gravity in a trial, and any hint of undue familiarity is normally avoided like a live wire. But Perez doubled down, adding with an almost playful cadence, "You make these hearings almost pleasant," the layered tone leaving just enough ambiguity to make the remark linger. In the gallery, a few people failed to suppress smirks. One woman leaned toward her friend with an expression that silently screamed, "Did you just hear that?" Blake's lawyer, determined not to take the bait a second time, kept their eyes fixed on their notes, their face an unmoving mask, while Perez, sensing the unease, moved seamlessly back into his defense, insisting that Blake's legal actions were not about legitimate discovery but about silencing his voice, reiterating that she was hell-bent on an alleged smear campaign, narrative that was itself untraceable and unsupported by evidence, and, most pointedly, that she was putting his children at real risk through the exposure and harassment that inevitably followed such high-profile targeting. To Perez, this was about more than celebrity gossip. It was about the rights of journalists, however unconventional, to report without being coerced into surrendering private sources or internal communications. Whether the judge saw his interruptions and asides as justified passion or disruptive grandstanding remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. In a hearing that was supposed to be a forgettable procedural stop, Perez Hilton had turned the room into a stage where reputations, narratives, and courtroom decorum itself were all in play, and the resulting performance was so strange, charged, and layered with subtext that it would leave everyone present replaying the events long after the gavel finally fell. The bailiff's eyebrows rose just slightly, his gaze flicking toward the bench as though seeking cues on whether the unfolding scene demanded intervention, but instead of the sharp rebuke everyone half expected, the judge broke from convention in a way that made the entire room shift in its seat, a small, genuine smile, not the tight, dismissive kind given to cut off nonsense, but the kind that suggested some kernel of amusement had slipped through the armor of judicial neutrality. It was fleeting, gone almost as quickly as it appeared, yet it carried enough weight to ripple through the attendees. No gavel, no clipped warning, no pointed reminder about courtroom decorum. Just that moment of acknowledgement before the judge's eyes returned to the docket. In most courtrooms, even mild breaches of conduct are swiftly corrected to preserve authority and order. And yet here, after an insult aimed squarely at opposing counsel followed immediately by an unmistakable flirtation with the bench, there was nothing. Did the judge see it as harmless banter, something unworthy of escalation? Or was there an unspoken familiarity, a subtle rapport that made space for such a break in the norm? No one in the room could be certain, but the speculation settled over the gallery like a second layer of curiosity, draped atop the tension already hanging thick in the air. And Perez, keen observer of reactions both on and off the record, absolutely noticed. That smile, the absence of pushback, acted not as a calming influence but as something closer to permission. Whether or not it was intended that way, the effect was instantaneous. He leaned forward again, testing just how far the boundaries might bend for him. Blake Lively's attorneys in their filings had already tallied over 500 pieces of content Perez had produced about her. videos, posts, headlines. Many of them critical, some outright mocking, labeling her a bully, accusing her of lying, and framing her legal moves as a campaign to silence Justin Baldoni. They cited his dismissal of her retaliation claims as non-existent, and pointed to colorful monikers like litigious lively, or harsher barbs referencing her past controversies. And yet, amid those accusations, Perez interwove moments of levity as if speaking directly to his critics, almost breaking the fourth wall of the hearing. "Can we just pause for a second?" he quipped, as though talking to a live stream rather than a court record, musing aloud about how someone in Blake's law firm was probably watching every Popcorn Planet video, counting and cataloging references just to use them here. "Hope you've got good snacks," he added, tone half sincere, half taunting. "I don't hate Blake Lively. I'm just reacting to the evidence. Good luck in court." It was an extraordinary level of self-awareness, almost a meta-commentary on the trial happening in real time. And again, no gavel, no stern interruption. The absence of formal correction hung heavier now, because under normal conditions, any defendant undermining the court's gravity with casual asides would be reined in swiftly, if not threatened with contempt. Judges typically have a spectrum of responses available, from a gentle but firm reminder to maintain decorum, to a formal reprimand, to fines or even removal from the courtroom. In countless prior cases, even much smaller infractions, snide remarks, sarcastic gestures, had earned defendants swift public corrections. Yet here none of that was happening. The judge, with over a decade of experience and a reputation for calm but unyielding control, especially in high-visibility cases, was letting Perez's commentary breathe. Legal veterans watching speculated in hushed tones. Perhaps the judge was trying to avoid giving Perez a bigger moment, wary of handing him a headline about being silenced in court. Others suggested it was strategic tolerance. Let him speak, let him burn out, rather than risk an explosion from clamping down mid-flow. But some could not ignore the other, more uncomfortable possibility. That celebrity status was altering the gravitational pull of courtroom rules. If an unknown party had thrown verbal punches at opposing counsel and then complimented the judge mid-hearing, would they still be sitting there? Or would they have been escorted out before they could finish the line? Scan the records and you'll find hardly a handful of cases where a non-famous litigant got away with even one such moment, let alone a series of them. Here, Perez had landed both an insult and a flirtation back-to-back, and the gavel still rested unused. Analysts on the outside admitted to bafflement. Some called it unusual. Others flatly said they'd never seen anything like it. The bigger question loomed. If public profile can bend the rules here, what does that mean for the principle that all are equal before the law? Yet not everyone was willing to let the moment pass quietly. At Blake's table, frustration was visible in the quick, clipped movements of her legal team. The lead attorney's pen scratched rapid notes, slid them toward co-counsel, who hunched in to read and respond. Their posture was tighter now, shoulders drawn in, heads dipping low for whispered exchanges that looked less like methodical legal strategy and more like emergency triage. Every so often, the lead lawyer's eyes flicked up to Perez as though bracing for another blow, then dropped back to the page. In the gallery, early curiosity had morphed into a restless, almost voyeuristic energy. One man in the second row leaned so far forward the usher had to gesture him back into his seat. Two younger women near the aisle had given up any pretense of hiding their amusement, hands covering mouths as they exchanged wide-eyed glances. Others were visibly unsettled, folding arms tight, gaze fixed straight ahead, lips pressed thin. Even a couple of clerks traded sidelong glances, tiny flickers of disbelief at what they were witnessing. Blake herself sat a few seats behind her counsel, posture composed but her face locked in a controlled stillness, eyes fixed on her lawyer rather than her opponent. Those who knew her well said that stillness was deliberate, a conscious refusal to give Perez the satisfaction of a visible reaction. The opposing table, however, had noticed the flirtation and wasn't prepared to ignore it entirely. Midway through Perez's verbal back and forth with the bench, Blake's attorney rose with a formal objection, citing irrelevant and inappropriate commentary for the record. The judge acknowledged the objection, and overruled it almost instantly, allowing the hearing to proceed without so much as a pause. That ruling seemed to confirm for Perez that the space to maneuver remained wide open. He leaned forward again, a half-smile curling, and delivered another barb. "I didn't realize we were performing today. Should I project louder for the back row?" The line landed with a fresh ripple of reaction. Half-stifled laughs, half-incredulous murmurs, because its implication was unmistakable. The whole proceeding was theater. For the lawyers, it was a dangerous edge to walk, because when you let the idea take root that court is merely a stage, you risk undermining its authority altogether. At the counsel table, hands pressed down on stacks of paper, as though physically grounding themselves against the pull of the spectacle. From that moment forward, the hearing seemed to teeter between two realities: the formal ritual of legal process with its measured tones and precise language, and the unrehearsed unpredictability of live performance, where wit, charisma, and celebrity cachet can alter the very texture of the moment. And in that fragile balance, the line between the pursuit of justice and the draw of entertainment blurred almost entirely, raising the uneasy question of whether the law itself could hold steady under the weight of fame's gravitational